بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الكريم. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can I request all the attendants in the hall to be quiet so that we can start inshallah our program. As scheduled, this session will be on Muslim students in public schools. We have a few guests and a number of aspects to cover. But before that, we have two of our young boys from the graduates of the Islamic school in Toronto. We did promise them yesterday to give them some slot in a program. They have a message for all of the parents here. So I will start by that, and then we'll run into our program, inshallah. I'll present you first Alex Hussein. I want him to come up here for about 4 to 5 minutes, and then Walid Sulaiman, and then we'll start our formal program. Thank you very much indeed. Assalamu alaikum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Let me start my speech by giving you a rundown about what my friend Walid Solomon and I will be talking to you about. Walid Solomon is just sitting down. He's the next speaker. First, I will give you a concise history of the Islamic Community School in Toronto, Ontario, and the dangers of public school. Then Walid will inform you on how you can help to start an Islamic high school in Toronto and relate to you his experience in the public school system. The Islamic school is a combination of two dreams: a dream to start a school in which Muslims could teach Muslims, and a dream to build a place where Muslim children could be taught without any outside influence. These dreams became a reality about 8 years ago when the Islamic Community School was formed. Its principal was Brother Abdullah Idris, and it had about 4 teachers teaching 60 students. We've come a long way since then. Slowly, every year, the school has grown by 1 grade. With each extra grade, the school has gained more and more respect, as well as popularity. But it has not been an easy climb. The school is faced continuously with fundraising problems to pay for new books, equipment, and teachers. At the end of 8 years, there is now not enough money to start a high school. And since today the school consists of over 250 students and 16 teachers, in addition to the fact that there are already over 3,000 students on the waiting list, the school already doesn't have enough space. Due to all these restraints, it would be difficult to start a new high school on the same premises, which we hope is where you can help us. The Islamic school has proven to many Muslims in Toronto that there is an alternative to public school education. To me, it was a truly fantastic experience in both academic and Islamic teachings. My only problem is that now that I've completed grade 8, I have to go back out into the public school system and be exposed to all the dangers that come with this society. It is even worse for Muslim girls. Not only do they have to face the problems of drugs, alcohol, and liberal behavior, they must also deal with all the harassment which they get about wearing Islamic attire. Our only solution will be to try to build an Islamic high school. Therefore, the Islamic School Student Council was formed to try to raise money to start a high school. This whole summer, Walid and I, along with many other students, have been trying to raise money. Unfortunately, most people are only able to give a limited amount, and the people who can give can only afford a little. However, we feel that if we can reach more Muslims, the money will start to come, and then we will be able to start a high school, and inshallah many more. Now Walid will tell you on how you can help. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Walid Sulaiman, and I am a graduate from the ISNA Islamic School in Toronto. Our school, as Alex said, was established 8 years ago with only 3 classes and a big dream. Since then, we have grown. We have grown greatly. And presently, alhamdulillah, our school has 10 classes ranging from senior kindergarten through grade 8. With over 250 students, our school has a staff of some of the most educated teachers in the area. With the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, along with ISNA and help from our Muslim community, we have brought this school a very long way. Personally, I joined the Islamic school when I was very young, back when I was in grade 2. It was a decision that was left to me. At that time, I did not know what was destined for me. I just thought of it as a new experience. But by Allah, ever since I have studied my decision, I found that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really led me to the straight path when I joined this school. I discovered this back when I was in grade 6. After learning a large amount of Quran and knowing all the basic principles of Islam, I decided to pull out of the Islamic school. 2 weeks later, I came back to visit, and my friends told me that they felt I had changed. I was not acting in the Islamic behavior that I had strived to learn, and yet I felt that I was the same. 2 more weeks went by, and I was reinstated in the Islamic school. Slowly but concisely, my Islamic code of ethics returned to me, and I have been building myself ever since then. I believe that every Muslim student has the right to an Islamic education. We have just been through a war where a lack of Islamic education made us humiliated in front of the entire world. Muslim against Muslim is what our ignorance led us to. This is one of the many, many reasons why we, the students, the next generation, representing Islam in the West and all across the world, should be educated. And who is responsible for our education? It certainly is not me. It is you, our parents. And I don't mean just my parents or my elders in Toronto or Canada, but all across the continent. You are responsible for every single student's Islamic education. Sometimes I also think to myself, my parents are good Muslims, but I am not as good as they are. What about my kids? If they will be less educated in Islam than I am, and if this pattern goes on for generations to come, who will be responsible? I always think to myself, who will be punished when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows them what happens in the future? I am sorry to say that it is you, our parents, who by the way brought us to the West in the first place. When I tell this to some people, they tell me that they came to the West to make the Muslim ummah bigger, stronger, and more compassionate. Well, I answer always, you can't expand the Muslim ummah if the Muslims in the first place are not setting a more than excellent example, or are foremost not educated an excellent Islamic education. What is the answer to this foreseeable problem? It is very simple. It is simply an Islamic education for all. Getting back to our school in Toronto, for the last couple of years, we have been adding an extra grade each year. Everything seemed to be going great. As I have said before, with some very educated teachers, our students had some of the highest averages in the area. In spite of all this, when it was time to go on and put another grade, which was grade 9, the dream to have a complete Islamic school was halted. The obstacle that would batter this dream was that the school did not have enough money to go on. In fact, the school needed $250,000 to expand the present school into a complete Islamic high school. With almost 1 week left in the school and everybody registered in a public school, the ISSC, or the Islamic School Student Council, led by a committee of 4, including myself, decided that this dream can still be accomplished. And so we started the impossible. Yes, we, the students, tried making $250,000 in a time span of under 2 months. We felt that for students to leave an ongoing Islamic education in a time in which they are most vulnerable is unacceptable to us. We talked with the heads of the school, but there was nothing that they could do. When we announced our very publicized campaign, we got lots of support, although there was some outright rejection. In fact, one brother told me that we are fighting a lost battle, a battle too big for us to handle, to which I strongly replied, the Prophet fought his battles with armies 10 times smaller than the kuffars, but with iman and taqwa in their hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped them to victory many times. Those words were ones that motivated me and my colleagues throughout this campaign. When I came to this conference, I had 3 goals that I wanted to accomplish. The first one was to convince you that our project is truly worthy of its cause. If the Muslim community builds a mosque that 3 generations down the road people don't go to anymore, is it more worthy than a school which would be inshallah ongoing and would teach its students to go to that mosque on a regular basis? Also, I have brought along with me 650 blank checks. I hope that by Sunday afternoon, these blank checks are all filled out. This is my second goal. My third goal, which may sound very exotic, is that I want to leave this conference with enough money to build an Islamic high school. For the rest of this conference, many of my colleagues will approach you on a one-to-one basis. Please donate generously to them, and they shall be more than proud to answer all of your questions. If you do not get to talk with one of our representatives, you can go to our booth and have a preview of our Islamic school. May Allah bless you all for your continuing support, and we hope that you shall help us once again. And remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إن تقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا يضاعفه لكم ويغفر لكم والله شكور حليم, which means, if ye loan to God a beautiful loan, He will double it to your credit, and He will grant you forgiveness, for God is most ready to appreciate service, most bearing. Thank you very much for your time, and let us all pray that we have Islamic high schools in every single city of this continent. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Takbir. That is the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that with all the pride we have in our children, that inshallah they will be carrying the torch. These are the children that we look forward for to graduate from Islamic schools. While we are doing this, we don't forget the millions of children who are in the public school system. We kept saying the ultimate solution for Muslims will be to have their own institutions, they have their own schools, because that would be the environment they can really make up what we want them to make up for. However, these schools across North America, in Canada and the United States, they don't accommodate more than 6,000 to 6,500 students that we have. And there are how many? 2 million of students in the public school. This is why we thought, especially in this convention, that special attention has to be paid to those students until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with our own schools where we can come to what I always call the total solution. This particular session is to guide parents, give them some ideas, some things that they can carry with them when they go of how to handle their children in the public schools, inshallah. Now we have basically 3 speakers and 1 discussant. I will take them one by one. I am very happy to introduce to you Dr. Charles Haynes, who came here to share with us particularly the constitutional rights that Muslim children could have in the public schools, what we can have and what we cannot. Dr. Haynes is the executive director of First Liberty Institute at George Mason University and the president of the National Council on Religion and Public Education. He will be speaking, as I said, on religious liberty and the rights of Muslim children in the public schools. He has a PhD in theology, but as you can see from his credentials, he is well informed about the liberty and constitutional rights of children, and I will be presenting him in this conference.
I'm delighted to be here. In the short time I've been here today, I've already been impressed with this great convention and this gathering, such commitment, such faith, and such a great contribution to the United States to have Islam growing in America. And that's why it's very important for us to understand the role of Islam in the public schools, because you will be more and more important in the future of the United States, and your part in the public schools will be more and more important for all Americans to understand. I'm going to start with a story that is probably familiar to most of you, or at least you have some story like it that you could tell. Not very long ago, when I was speaking to a group of students in Georgia, after the session was over and all the questions were finished, a student came up to me and he took me aside so that other people wouldn't hear. And he said, Dr. Haynes, thank you for talking about religious liberty for all Americans and in the importance of teaching it in our public schools. And thank you for saying that we must teach about religion in history and other courses in public school, and we must teach about Islam properly. And I said, well, you're quite welcome. I said, this is what I committed to, this is what I love to do. I said, but why are you so interested? Why does this mean so much to you? And he said, well, you see, I'm the only Muslim student in this high school that I go to. And my fellow students don't understand my faith at all. And sometimes they make fun of Islam, and they make fun of my faith, because they're not learning anything about it when they learn history, when they learn current events. He said, and I'm also an American citizen, but sometimes I don't feel as though I'm treated like other students, other American citizens. I hear that over and over again as I travel around the country. In our public schools, in our communities, people are not being treated fairly, and people don't understand one another. The great question, I think, before the United States today, as pluralism expands in our nation, is how are we going to live together in this nation with our deep differences? Because we have very deep differences as citizens in this country, and the same is true in Canada. So we have to think about how are we going to maintain ourselves as a nation when we have these very deep differences between us. In other words, what are the ground rules for living together and working together as citizens of one nation? Now let me say first what the ground rules are not. The ground rules in the United States of America are not religious. This is not a Christian nation. This is not a Judeo-Christian nation. This is not a Judeo-Christian Islamic nation. This is a nation where people of all faiths must be treated with the same respect and with the same rights. The United States was founded on this principle, and this is the principle that holds us together as a nation. Just because most people in a particular public school or in a particular community may be Christian does not mean that Christians should be favored in that public school or in that community. In this country, thank you, in this country, the majority rules, but we are not majoritarian. What that means is that a majority of people in a community cannot pass a law or teach a curriculum that oppresses the minority, any minority. The ground rules for Americans are not religious, they are civic. The ground rules that we share as citizens of this nation are found in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The entire Constitution and all of the Bill of Rights are very important to each and every person gathered here today. But the most important 16 words in the entire Constitution are the opening words of the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. These words were added to our Constitution 200 years ago this year, in 1791. These 16 words guarantee every citizen of this country full protection for freedom of religion, for freedom of conscience. These words mean that as a nation we recognize that every citizen has an inalienable right to freedom of conscience. Every citizen. The framers of the Constitution called these God-given rights. In America, these rights are not given to you by the state. And these rights cannot be taken away from you by the state. For Muslims in America and for all citizens, these are rights that you have because you are a human being and you are a citizen. Now, what do they mean? They mean two things. They first mean that there can be no establishment of religion in this country. That's very important for you. In the United States, no faith can be established and control all other faiths. Muslims in the United States are not guests in this country. Muslims in America are full citizens with complete freedom of religion in a nation where the government cannot interfere with your faith. Secondly, every citizen of the United States is guaranteed free exercise of religion. What does that mean? That means that you are not just tolerated to be in the United States. You are guaranteed full freedom to practice your faith, to promote your faith, to be a part of the public square, to be full citizens in every respect. That means there is no second-class citizenship in the United States. All citizens of all faiths must be treated fairly in this country. Now, brothers and sisters, I know that the constitutional rights that I've just talked about are not your deepest convictions. Your deepest convictions are your religious convictions, are your commitments to God. That's as it should be. This nation was founded to protect the rights of people, to affirm their commitments religiously, and be protected to practice out of those commitments without interference by the government. But as citizens of this country, you also have civic commitments and responsibilities. Civic commitments. They're not your deepest commitments. They're not your most important commitments, but they are important for the life of the nation, and they are commitments that you have to understand if we are going to work out the differences in public schools. Whether you send your children to an Islamic school in the United States or a public school, I hope that each and every one of you will take seriously the constitutional principles I've just talked about and make sure that your students are learning them. Whether you are in an Islamic school or in a public school, it is equally important that citizens understand their fundamental rights and how those rights are protected by our founding documents. Now, let me say something about what these principles mean in public schools and what they mean for you if you are a parent who has children in public schools or you have friends who are in public schools. These principles mean, to me, first and foremost, that public school curriculum materials, textbooks, courses must be fair and balanced. Schools must teach about Islam, and they must teach about Islam in a way that is scholarly, that is balanced, that is fair treatment. And teachers who teach history in public schools particularly must be trained to teach about Islam in a way that is fair. Let me underline for you that in public schools we are teaching about Islam. The principles of the Constitution say that in a public school we cannot indoctrinate kids in Christianity. We cannot indoctrinate kids in Judaism or Islam or atheism. But we can and we must teach about the religions of the world when we teach history, when we teach current events. This has not been done, and where it has been done, it has often been done poorly in a way that's distorted. One of the reasons that there's so much misunderstanding in this country about Islam is because the 43 million children in public schools are not learning about Islam properly. We must change this. Secondly, Muslim students have particular needs and requirements that must be addressed by the public schools. I've been fortunate to work with Dr. Shaban Ismail over the last number of years, and we have tried to bring about a new understanding of these needs and requirements of Muslim students in public schools. These needs and requirements must be accommodated wherever possible. I say that the principles in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States require that we accommodate the needs of students when their concerns are based on their religious convictions. I want to underline here that these needs, these requirements must be reasonable and feasible for the public school to accommodate. The public schools cannot spend money to promote religion, but the public schools can and should try to work out how they do things so that it will not conflict with your religion or undermine the practice of your faith or the practice of your child's faith. Nothing we do in public schools, in other words, should undermine what you're teaching your child in the home and in the mosque. What does this mean? This means that, of course, if there are dress requirements for Muslim students and their parents want them to keep these dress requirements, the school should accommodate that. If there are requests for excusal for particular holidays, the school should accommodate that. If you, as a parent, want your child to be excused from certain activities or discussions in the public school, as long as that request is a limited one, it should be accommodated. If you, however, would like the school to set aside a certain room for prayer, that probably cannot be accommodated, because that would require the state to be involved in your religion. And remember, in the United States, we try to keep the state from interfering with your religion. Students can, however, pray during school times. That should be accommodated where possible. In short, all of the requests and the needs must be seriously considered by public schools and, where possible, accommodated. That's not my idea. That's not a Jewish idea or an Islamic idea or a Christian idea. That's a constitutional requirement. Brothers and sisters, let me end my part by saying this. I implore you to get involved with public schools. I know that you want to establish Islamic schools, and that is your constitutional right to do so. But I implore you to, at the same time, work for better public schools, to be involved in selection of textbooks, to be involved in what the teacher is doing, to go to the principal and the school boards, to get elected to school boards, so that you can be a part of what we're doing in public education. And this isn't just for the Muslim students in public schools. This is for all students. The future of our nation, the future of the United States, rests on how well we learn about one another as we learn history in public schools. The future of our nation rests on how well we treat one another as we work out our differences in the public schools and in the public square. You are a very important part of the future of this nation. You have much to contribute to the nation and to the schools. I ask that you join with me and work to make public schools places where all students of every faith feel welcome and comfortable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next speaker is our sister Suzanne Douglas. Suzanne is currently a graduate student at Georgetown University Center for Contemporary Arabic Studies. She has a goal to continue in progress in preparing teaching materials on Islamic history, on geography, and social sciences. She has been involved with curriculum, and that began with her work at the Islamic Saudi Academy in Washington, D.C. area. She had taught in the academy for about 6 years and served as the head of social studies department. She will be speaking to us on attitudes and ways of adjustment and accommodation in public school. Tfaddal.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I'm very happy. This is the first convention I've been able to attend. I've been out of the country for a period and actually returned 6 years ago, but nonetheless, this is the first one I've been able to attend. I'm very heartened by what I see here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I was also very heartened by the words of our two young students who are making efforts to begin an Islamic school, and it's a very good example of how sometimes the intention is not with the money, and the money is not with the intention. I am from where I worked was a very well-funded Islamic school, which has some rather limited problems with its intentions in terms of Islam. At any rate, Dr. Haynes has laid out for you the reasons for seeking accommodation and the ways and means and the fact that we can seek accommodation in the public schools. Certainly it would be, as the brother said, a total solution if all students could grow up and thrive in the cocoon, so to speak, of Islamic schools in which we can nurture each other, and Muslims teaching Muslims is an excellent way of education. It's, however, not available to everybody, and it's not necessarily the choice of everybody. Many of you will have your children in the public schools. Many children prefer to make their way in the public schools if they intend to continue to live in this country and to work and serve Islam. So this is not a choice that we can make in a pejorative way for the students or for the parents. We need both alternatives. Both alternatives will continue, and I hope that both of them continue to thrive. However, it is very important that students and parents seek accommodation in the public schools, and it's also very important that our community leaders work with the public schools, with local communities, and indeed on the national level, to work for accommodation in the public schools. What I'm generally going to be speaking about is the kind of accommodation which has been ongoing since the first Muslim set his foot in the public schools, especially those who really care and whose parents really care to perpetuate the religion and to raise their children in that religion. And that is the kind of accommodation which occurs every day in the schools and is initiated by students and parents, one-to-one with the teacher or with the principal, or in groups where a student initiates or a group of parents initiate a request for accommodation of the sort that Dr. Haynes was talking about. In other words, seeking an opportunity to pray, seeking the kind of passive accommodation which simply allows one to be different from the majority that one finds in the public schools. This includes also a number of other types of accommodation, like the question of the dietary content of food in the cafeteria, the request not to eat pork. These are things which, of course, get a little bit more into administrative issues and areas, but can still be initiated on the student-teacher level. The importance, as Dr. Haynes has outlined, of these efforts is nothing less than our ability to maintain and perpetuate our faith and transmit it to the next generation, as the young brother who spoke before us so very eloquently represented. Because if we are going to be dealing with a sort of diminishing returns through each generation, there really isn't very much hope for a community in this country or in the world. The spirit in which the accommodation is carried out also determines whether or not our youth feels confident and comfortable in the schools or ashamed and awkward. And not just in the schools, obviously, but as that extends to their behavior within the society. The implications are very, very obvious for building Muslim character. I think, however, there are two kinds of accommodation which we can seek. The first one, I think both of which Dr. Haynes covered quite well. I want to speak a little bit more in detail about them. The first, obviously, is those kinds of accommodation which allow us to continue our practice of our faith on a daily basis. You could say ibadah and ma'lumat in terms of the mu'amalat, in terms of dress and prayer and decorum between the sexes and so on. The other kind, however, is the kind which she began to allude to, which is curricular inclusion. How do the schools talk about Islam? How do the textbooks talk about Islam? Do they talk about Islam? Do they only mention it in a brief way as a civilization that sort of came and went? Or do they mention it as an ongoing part of history? Do they represent contemporary Muslims in a good way? We, as even on the student and the parent level, even though we cannot always mobilize the support of communities, can do a great deal to bring about a change in the way Muslims are viewed in this country. I'd like to outline, however, in the beginning of our more practical suggestions here, that, as many of you will have found out, the most important component of a request for accommodation is the attitude which the parents bring. This includes the attitude of the students, and the attitude of the parents, and the attitude of any community leaders who may become involved. We have to build a positive relationship between ourselves and the teachers and the administrations. We have to let them know what we expect and let them know what to expect from us as well. We have to speak clearly, and we have to make ourselves and our viewpoints known. And if they have questions, we need to answer them obviously with calmness and by marshaling the knowledge that we have. One of the most helpful things, I think, is in demonstrating a commitment on the part of Muslim parents and students to academic and social responsibility. That the teachers and the administrators can demonstrably see that these students who are requesting accommodation are students of good character, are students who are not obviously troublemakers, who are not people who disrupt things, and who the teacher can depend upon also for academic perseverance. This obviously goes a very, very long way toward just the very natural human receptiveness to going forth in accommodation. I think many times when students have come, this has been the most impressive thing, when students have come to request accommodation from teachers as a group, and this may be in a situation where only 2 or 3 or 4 or a half dozen Muslims are even in the school at all, in some of the far-flung places. I realized several years ago, 10 or 15 years ago, This was the case in many, many places where now Muslim students make up a sizable minority of certain schools. Certainly, school officials and teachers are going to be extremely impressed with the sincerity and willingness of the students to carry out the terms of their faith and the demands of their faith, and are going, for this reason, to be more willing to accommodate. I think it's also important for us to realize that we're not going to the schools hat in hand to request these accommodations. We also have to realize, as Dr. Haynes has hinted, that the school is going to benefit from our requesting these accommodations, even when they involve requests to be very different from the run-of-the-mill student. We are going to be demonstrating for them as a kind of ambassadors and representatives of our faith and of being different and of an alternative way of doing things that's available in this country that is going to expand the minds of the students around us and of the other parents around us. And this will be carried, it's amazing how students will be impressed. They will carry this to their friends in other schools, to their parents, and they will carry this experience throughout their lives. And they will obviously learn, because in the working world and on the street and in the malls and everywhere else, they are going to meet Muslim students. And you know, the syndrome that we always have is, well, you know, those Muslims. In fact, my own mother, who, you know, has this to a certain extent. Well, you know, Muslims, they're kind of strange, but, you know, I know her. She's my next door neighbor. She's my daughter. She's, you know, she's normal. She's regular. She does everything just like we do. It's a very silly sentiment. But, in fact, that's the way many people think. You know, the other is the mass. But the individual whom you have met and confronted and been satisfied with your relationship with will change your view of the whole. Secondly, something that's very important in requesting this type of accommodation is the sincerity and the commitment of the student and his parents. The least successful requests for accommodation, and the ones which I have heard teachers protest about and be utterly bewildered about, are those which are initiated by parents, but the students don't want to go along with it. So that what one is asking the teacher to do, in a sense, is to enforce what one can't do himself at home. To enforce a commitment. For example, I recall that in one of the sessions that I carried out with public school teachers, with Dr. Haynes, was, what do you do when the parents are, so to speak, putting pressure on the child to have what he called, quote, a Muslim persona, as if it's sort of a mask you put on, when the child doesn't wish to have it. He wishes, I suppose they assume, to have an American, whatever that is, persona. Now, this is very dangerous talk, and this is a very dangerous situation to put a teacher in, or a school administrator, because it's extremely damaging to the cause of Islam, and certainly is extremely damaging to the child himself. These conflicts must be resolved at home. Thank you. We can't ask the school to act in loco parentis in religious matters. They are not constitutionally allowed to do so. And furthermore, they're personally scared to death to do it, and they feel very much put upon to have to do it. But again, when the child is showing this commitment, especially, this will impress the teacher in a way which is very, very deep, and will obviously increase the success of any such request. I think we also need, in this same vein, to learn to deal with the kinds of negative responses that we may at first acquire, because there's an automatic feeling on the part of many teachers who have not been exposed to Muslims before, that they may feel, well, as I said before, is it the parents who really want this, or is it the teacher, is it the child who really wants this? And the automatic assumption is to think, well, you know, the poor little child has to do this and has to do that from the home out. And we must, you know, have we must get rid of this feeling in them by making our expectations very, very clear. Also, I think it's very important when we request accommodation from the school to provide practical ways of meeting our needs. In other words, we don't go to the school simply with a problem. We go with the problem and the solution ready. The students beforehand will have worked out what are the logistics perhaps of having a room, a temporary room. We can say, well, it's no problem, we don't have to have a room, we carry our mosques around with us. We put down a rug and we have a room. It doesn't have to be the same room every day. So that we can sort of blast down any sorts of brick walls that come in our way. But the only way to do it is to have a plan and to have an alternative plan and to be able to keep answering with alternative plans by thinking it through and by remaining calm, and not by simply going and demanding these things, but by working it out, telling them what do we need, why do we need it, what do we expect, how can we work it out, how can we implement it, and what consequences will it have? None. In the case of the school life will not be disrupted and so forth. It's also important, I think, to educate the teachers who may balk. I remember when in a session in Philadelphia, there was a great debate that went on between 3 or 4 of the teachers there, or school administrators, about can I be expected to reinforce and inculcate the values of a religion which is not my religion in the children? For example, this teacher said, well, what if I'm at a school picnic and I see a Muslim child eating a hot dog? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to say, don't eat that hot dog, you're Muslim? He said, I can't do that, that's not my faith. I don't mind eating hot dogs. No problem. Look at the different way you can approach this situation. You ask the teacher to approach, if such a conflict came up. How different it is when you say to the child, in the spirit of tolerance and the desire to inculcate knowledge, going up to the child quietly and saying, are you aware that this hot dog has pork in it? Finished. Now what's left is left to the child's conscience. The teacher has done her job. There are some teachers, however, who are willing to carry out teaching about the values, who have not made such a sharp separation between values whose origin is religion and education, so that they do something which they call value-free education, which many times when speakers are speaking misspeak and say value-less education. I think it is, frankly. I would like to speak, I have only a few more minutes left, I'd like to speak about the second type of accommodation, which is very important, and I think I can give you some very practical suggestions on what to do. Now, I'm a social studies teacher, so I'm making advertisements for that, but I think that we cannot underestimate the importance of asking the schools, and you can say forcing the schools, to accommodate the curriculum to the needs of a very much broadened student body. And we're not only doing this for us, we're doing it for the sake of truth. Because the standard American fare in social studies curricula is simply false. It's wrong. It's not true. It's a view of history which is very much encapsulated, very much simplified, and very much in the service of the sort of vein that, well, the victors write the history. They get to write the history books. And as you know, anyone who has been through the public schools, as I have, things have improved greatly since I was in school, and even more greatly since my mother was in school. But they haven't improved enough. And what's happening in this huge debate over multicultural education is basically that people think that minorities are asking, well, bring in something about us, and bring in something about us, and bring in something about us. Well, obviously what's going to happen is you're going to get the curriculum. It's not going to be finished whether you went to school from September all the way to the next September. Because that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to speak about the human experience. And to bring in, to abandon this shell of, we're going to tell you what it was like, and then we'll also tell you about Africa, and we'll also tell you about Asia, and we'll also tell you about those. No, we need to speak about the human experience and change the focus. This is a long-term goal, and I know that Sister Sharifah will speak more about that. But I want to give us some very practical suggestions for how to prepare our children to make their own curricular inclusion right there in the classroom. And I know many, many, many of you, students who are present and also parents, know that your children are doing this, engaging in the dialogue in schools, raising their hands, speaking to the teacher, speaking to other students, debating. And what are the prerequisites for doing that? Knowledge. Where would they get that knowledge? Islamic schools. Doesn't make sense, does it? You don't have your child in a Muslim school, you have him in a public school. How are they going to learn Islamic history? How are they going to learn the issues of Islamic history? How are they going to learn why things are the way they are in the Muslim world right now, and how they got that way when we have this glorious past? The only way they're going to do it, brothers and sisters, is with you at home and in the community centers, in the mosques, and in the supplementary schools. We shouldn't restrict our supplementary schools to simply Islamic studies in terms of ibadah and manners and reading Quran and learning Arabic. We must include social studies. I hope some of you do. I haven't heard about too many that do, but I think we need to do so much more intensively. We must also concentrate on it in home discussions. We must also think when we speak to children when we're watching the news. What do we say? Do we bring careful, measured pronouncements, or do we make wild statements? I know there were a lot of wild statements flying during the last months. But this is very, very important to the atmosphere in which our children grow up. We need to encourage questions. We need to encourage critical thinking in them. And we need to encourage deep reading. We have to overcome the idea that's all too prevalent in the Arab world, and unfortunately a product of post-colonial regimes, that history is a garbage faculty. It's not. It's a very vital part of our identity. Thus, armed students will naturally contribute in class. We need to discuss in more informal gatherings these types of things also. In sisters groups, we need to discuss more history, because we will be able to prepare our children better, and not with a rose-colored glasses view, but with a critical understanding of Islamic history, which doesn't mean we tell them what to think, we teach them how to find out the answers to these issues. We also have to offer schools and teachers practical support ourselves or through our children in the classes. Such things, simple things as Heritage Day tables, offering ourselves, our children, or our community leaders as guest speakers. Show and tell, things from our culture. You can do this from kindergarten age. We have to offer visits to Islamic centers and mosques. We also, and this is what I'm going to conclude with because Sister Sharifah is going to continue with it, is work through PTAs and local school district textbook selection committees and keeping our eyes open for community and school events which touch Muslims, putting out publications and so on and so forth, and getting into the system which makes the decisions about what children learn in the schools. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Suzanne. Before we have the discussant for the session, we have one last speaker, who is Sister Sharifah Al-Khateeb. She is presently the president of the Muslim Educational Council. She is a writer, and she wrote on multicultural materials. In 1989, she co-authored the Arab World Notebook. She is involved in public schools for 4 years as a volunteer. Now she sits in 5 school board committees of Fairfax County in Virginia. She did run for the school board of Fairfax in 1989 and 91. She is a Muslim activist, as she describes herself. She will be speaking to us on making the educational system work for you. I would like to invite her to speak to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I know you must be a little bit tired by now and sleepy, so I hope that you have a few more moments of your ear to listen to something else. What I want to talk about before talking about how to be involved in the public school system is what kinds of attitudes we have that need to change before we can get involved in public schools. I think that the amount of expertise that Muslims collectively have, the amount of years of wisdom, the amount of abilities in the conglomerate is fantastic. We can add positively to any endeavor that goes on in America if we go to it with the right attitudes. And I think the only thing that prevents us from very successfully being a part and parcel of this country and adding something new and better and good to this country is our own idea about who we are, and also our own need to develop the abilities that we have and work with others in a positive way. There are a lot of decisions and discussions that we should have that we don't have. We don't have them at the family level, we don't have them at the community level, we don't have them at the mosque level, and we very rarely have them at the national level. We have them as speeches, but we don't seriously, and as Susan said, with critical thinking, sit down and plan out strategies about how we think and how we need to go from point A to point B. Questions such as, who are we? Do we want to be ethnic or Islamic? Do we want to be inclusive or exclusive? Do we want to be insular or open? These kinds of questions I almost never hear being discussed at any Islamic centers or weekend schools or anything like that. Mostly what we want to do is have the basics of Islamic history and the basics of Islamic ideology taught to our children, and then we think that's enough and they're off on their own, and we really never discuss why they're doing what they're doing, who they think they are, who we think we are, and what we hope to accomplish in living in America. So that the kids sort of go off on their own, very confused about who they are and what they want to be. And very, very often the parents assume that whatever it is they want their children to be is the same as what their children want to be. And those are almost never the same, and increasingly so. And what you find is a great divide between what the parents think their children want to be and what their children want to be. And very often the children develop a split personality where they are one way only in front of their parents' eyes, and they're another way when they're not in front of their parents' eyes. And I won't call it hypocrisy, I call it a split personality, because they want to please their parents and they want to please the larger society in which they live, in which their parents have not helped them to mediate an understanding and have not helped them to actually successfully negotiate a relationship with that larger society. So what happens is a split personality. Who do we want our children to be? How much of the world do we want to allow in? How much do we want to keep out? We need to develop concepts of assimilation and diversity. We have not done that. We haven't done it individually or family-wise or collectively on a national basis. We need to relearn Islamic concepts of equality and of mutual respect, starting with, for instance, the constitution that was started at Medina by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he accommodated and secured the rights of everyone who was in that society, whether they were Muslim or not. And that was the first constitution in the world. Very often, and always actually, I've seen in the U.S., when they talk about the history of constitutional development, the constitution at Medina is never even mentioned because they don't know about it. And we haven't told them about it. So we can't blame them because they don't know that it exists. Another kind of question we need to ask is, how can we collectively look at our children and at the schools? We haven't developed a collective attitude or a collective approach to the schools. In fact, we haven't developed an individual approach to the schools. Very often, parents change from one year to the other in terms of their expectation of their children and their schools, so that when they approach the schools, they seem either half-baked or they seem confused, and they exude that confusion to the schools, who are in turn even more confused. We need to understand how the schools look at us as Muslims, how they look at Islam, and how they look at our children. And we need to think about how can we help the children, the schools, and the school systems. What do Muslim parents really want for their children? What do they want their children to be? Do they want their children to be an ethnic child, like a Pakistani American or an Egyptian American? Do they want their children to be an American child with a de-emphasized side identity called Islam? Do they want their child to be a Muslim American? Or do they want their child to be an American Muslim? There's a big difference. What are you emphasizing? We need to discuss these issues, and we need to find answers on an individual basis, a family basis, and a community basis, and a national basis. We haven't even begun the process. What are the parents' attitudes toward children? They feel they have a sense of responsibility. They look at them as a gift. They look at them as an extension of the self, and very often they think that whatever it is they want their children to be is what they will be, and they get shocked very often when those two are not the same. They often want to achieve through their children what they were not able to achieve themselves, and very often that boils down to something which is socioeconomic and not spiritual. What they're pushing their children toward is economic development and not spiritual development, and not intellectual development and not conceptual development. It's only economic development, and we miss that boat as parents, thinking that we're exposing them to Islamic concepts of what they should be about. But very often, if you try to think about what you talk about to your child more often during the week, if you think about it, very often it comes down to a bottom line, a dollar value on something, or what their economic goals are, rather than other goals. Also, sometimes parents think of their children as a continuation of a family name and tradition, and then they bring cultural pressure to bear on those children that develops this split personality. And very often, too often, Muslim parents define themselves and seek to define their children not in a positive way, but in a negative way in terms of what we are not. We're better because we're not like the Americans. The Americans do A, B, C, and D, and we're better because we don't do those things. But that's not an identity, that's a non-identity. So we need to develop a real identity, a positive identity that doesn't depend on saying what we're not. What are we? And most Muslim parents are excellent at telling children what they shouldn't do and what they're not, but they're terrible at telling them what they should be and what they could be. And so the parents don't know, and the children don't know either. And the fact is that many of us who came to these shores from other countries had a whole society as backup for support of developing the mind and the personality of that child. But in this country, we are reduced to nuclear families very often. There are very few of us who have the extended families that we had in the countries that we came from. And so we don't have the aunts and the uncles and the grandparents and the lady down the street and the man who's at the corner store who's going to give comments to the child and develop their personality. We're really on our own as parents, and we fail to realize that. And we think somehow by the osmosis that we grew up as okay human beings, our children are going to grow up as okay human beings, but they don't, because we need to supply all those other needs that are missing. Then, what are the attitudes toward the schools? I see basically four main types of attitudes toward the schools and parents. One is the fearful parent who has the old memories of what school was like in the Middle East, where the Middle East, the Far East, Southeast Asia, Yugoslavia, wherever the Muslims are coming from. But the old memories are very similar, that you do not go to school unless there's a crisis, you do not get involved unless you have to, that if you say anything at all, it could be a political mistake and get part of your family killed, and that you just want to stay away from the place as much as possible. That is the reason I believe that most Muslim parents don't get involved in public schools. They're fearful of that involvement, and they don't know what it involves. You'll be surprised to know that a majority of Muslim parents don't know what a PTA is. They have never known what it was. They never experienced it. And so they don't, the Parents and Teachers Association, they don't even have the concept of what a PTA is. So that they don't know how to get involved and how to have positive input into the schools. So such parents very often develop the philosophy of just fit in, don't rock the boat, don't tell them anything about your culture, it's not necessary, just fit in as an American. And what happens in the end result is that those children grow up with absolutely no cultural consciousness, no Islamic consciousness, they're not proud of themselves, they lack a self-identity, and that they very often become very confused adults. Then you have the second kind of parent, who's the combative parent. They're constantly assuming that the school has evil intentions toward Islam, Muslims, and their children in particular. And as a result, they're always trying to see what they can fight with the teacher about next. And the teachers, believe me, do not appreciate this approach. The third kind of parent is the part-time parent, who almost never gets involved unless some crisis is brought to their attention. And then they jump on it with both hands and both feet and want to jump down somebody's throat. It's usually the principal or the immediate teacher. And as soon as the crisis is over, they disappear again for the rest of the year. Then you have the fourth kind of very, very rare parent who's involved. And they're consistently involved. And they may not be involved in a very huge way. It may be that all they do is go in and talk to the teacher once a month to discuss the progress of their child, but they're involved in some way, in a positive way, not a negative way. What do schools think about Muslims and about Muslim children? Well, system-wide, they really think of them as a growing multiculturalism. A growing multiculturalism that's very, very fraught with problems, because as a teacher and as a school system, they have to think about what will they have to provide to accommodate these new growing numbers of multicultural students that they know very little about. So it's problem oriented in their minds. The other thing is that as they find more students coming into the system, for instance in Fairfax County we have in the year 2000, by the year 2000, more than 1/3 of the school system will be multicultural. And it's a very educated school system, by and large in terms of the parents. And they find this very troubling, and they're not sure how to handle it. And they're trying now to start discussing it so that they'll do it successfully. But they think about things like, what's the bottom line? The bottom line meaning financially. How much are we going to have to pay for increased needs of English language instruction for people who have never heard a word of English or have never been in a school, period? We have children coming from Afghanistan who have never been in school at age 12 and age 15 for that matter. So they think about these things and they think about the bottom line. On a school basis, the principals and teachers will be thinking about, what do I personally need to provide to this child that's different than what I have to provide to the other students? On a teacher level, the teacher will be thinking, how can I teach this student the program of studies that's been devised by the school system and also accomplish that in a successful way without ignoring my other students? So they will be thinking about all these and they will be trying to accomplish them. And they try to do it in the best way possible. Generally, there is an agreement among teachers, principals, and school systems that all cultures and all religions have to be presented accurately and adequately. So they do have that agreement in their minds, but frankly speaking, knowing about your child's particular culture is not at the top of their priority list. If you want that to become a priority, then you have to make it a priority. You have to get involved to the point where they're going to, in a positive way, so that they respect you, they respect your faith, your culture, and they actually would invite you to be involved with them in the process of educating these children in a way that teaches about your religion, not tries to convert them to Islam. Because many parents come to the school system with the idea that I might get some convertees here. And that's the wrong attitude to approach the schools with. Your attitude should be that I simply want to inform. And that's enough, just to inform them about the different concepts that Islam has to offer, and that's their choice to make of whatever they want to do with it from that point on. But if you come to it with the attitude that you're just going to inform, you'll have a much more positive reception from people in the schools. Why do teachers avoid teaching about Islam and Muslims? Well, I was on a committee in 1989 as part of the Human Relations Committee, and we did a special project on teaching about religion in the public schools, and we did a survey of teachers in Fairfax County. We found that the teachers avoid teaching because they don't know anything about it. They feel ignorant. And they actually say, I feel ignorant. I don't know enough to feel comfortable to teach that subject. So what is our job as Muslims who are interested in them teaching accurately about Islam? We have to provide them with the information. We have to provide seminars for teachers. We have to provide information booklets that are tear-out sheets that they can just copy on a copy machine and hand to their students that wouldn't offend anyone, that are simply informational. We have a lot of work to do that we haven't done, but we're very good at complaining. So we have to have a different approach, a positive approach to changing the way that they view us. There's also a growing fear among teachers in the public school system of multiculturalism and multiple ethnicities that might become the thing that replaces one American consciousness. And that's being reflected in a growing body of literature, including well-known magazines like Time magazine that discuss the whole issue of multiculturalism in a very fearful kind of way. Educators ask, how can we have American national unity if we emphasize our ethnicity? Arthur Schlesinger Jr. in one article in Time magazine on July 8th said, "The cult of ethnicity has unhealthy consequences. It rejects the historical American goals of assimilation and integration. The balance is shifting from unum to pluribus." So this is something that we have to realize, we have to deal with. Some people have even suggested that the new crusade is an intellectual one. And there is a battle going on, and there's a fear there. And we should not put it under the rug. We have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it up front and be very informational in the way that we do it. I think that there are several things that we have to buy into if we want to change attitudes. One of them is that multiculturalism and the appreciation of various cultures is multifaceted. If we want people to understand our culture, we have to be just as willing to understand everybody else's culture. We have to believe in the freedom of religion and thought for all people, not just for us, and not for them just accommodating Islamic concepts. We have to have the respect for the right of youth to choose their lifestyle. This is something that we didn't develop yet. And we have to be able to guide them, not force them. And that, if we have accomplished the right early Islamic education, they will be making the choices that we want them to make, but not by force, by choice. We have to buy into the idea of involvement and not seclusion, because we can't change a system's attitudes if we're not involved in it. And we have to work toward the common good of America and not just for the good of Muslims. We have to realize that schools are going to be the socializer of our children, the one who shapes our children's minds and concepts of themselves. They are the definer of the life goals of our children. We think it's us, but it's no longer us. It is the schools. So that if we can do all these things, we can then think of ourselves as people who can contribute to a world order that's positive, that's good, a world order that's inclusive of everyone, not just of ourselves, and that we can teach our children to be good world citizens, not just good citizens of Islam, but good world citizens. We have to be willing to throw away our cultural baggage, which is negative, the kind of cultural baggage which has nothing to do with Islam, but only has to do with traditions that are very often negative. And we have to be able to believe in and practice tolerance of differences. And that means for everyone, not just for ourselves. So if we can get beyond that, then we can be successful contributors to public school systems everywhere from the local school level to the county level to the school board level. And there's nothing stopping us from getting involved. In fact, school systems and teachers give a very positive response to us when we approach them positively. And they're willing to accept our input as long as it is positive. So we have to be willing to work with other human beings to solve everyone's human needs, not just our own. And I can recommend that you would get involved in the following facets of school systems. One is the social studies book adoption committees, the social studies curriculum advisory committees, the Human Relations Committee, the Gifted and Talented programs, the Minority Achievement programs, the Literature committees, and the Superintendent's Advisory committees. On the county level, we should get involved in the Human Rights Commission, the Environment and Parks Commission. Islam has a lot to say about respecting the environment, but we almost never share it with others. Also, the public health facilities. We need to get involved with them and help to solve problems of everyone, not just of Muslims. But then we can bring to the mental health facilities an Islamic view, which we haven't previously done. The census committees that count heads, we need to help the census committees do that. The Juvenile Court Commission, alhamdulillah, most of the Muslim youth are not very wayward types of people, but they have problems too, and the other youth have problems that we can help them solve, and we can bring to the solving of those problems our Islamic ideology and our willingness as a human being to help another human being. We haven't done that up till now in large numbers. I think that if we do all these things, we can have a permanent effect on the direction in which public schools are moving. And this is a critical juncture. This year, 1991 and 1992, are critical junctures because we've just ended a war. And that war has created a concept that's still developing as to what the New World Order is. And believe me, that concept of what the New World Order is reaches all the way from the White House to every single facet of public education. And people are thinking about that, and it will affect how our children are treated in public schools. So if you want the idea of who we are and what we can become to change in a positive way, you've got to get in there with both hands and both feet and your mind and your tongues and everything that you can put into it so that we can accomplish that goal. Thank you very much. I just wanted to mention in closing there are some positive developments going on among Muslims to help change images. One of them is looking at the history books, social studies books, world cultures books. I am involved in a 1.5-year project as part of the Muslim Education Council to look at every single sentence that exists in all the books nationwide about Muslims, Islam, the Arab world, even the pictures that are presented. To pull those things out, look at them, see what's wrong, rewrite what's wrong about them, and then have those checked by scholars, and then submit that to the book companies and ask them to change it. I hope that all of you parents will support us in these kinds of activities, because that will have a long-range effect on changing people's minds. And several people around the country are involved in this kind of project. Brother Mansour out in California is doing it. There's a sister in West Virginia involved in this project, another one in South Carolina, myself in Virginia. So several of us are involved in this project, and we should all help in the process in whatever way possible. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. I do struggle when there is a speaker and we feel we benefit a lot from what they are saying, but still we have to be timely, and that's why we had to squeeze ourselves, and I have to say sorry for that. Our discussant, and the only discussant we have, is our brother Dr. Sha'ban Ismail, who is currently the education director of the educational department in ISNA, and he has been serving in the education department. He had a lot of communication and contact with particularly the full-time schools, and he is currently coordinating the establishment of the Islamic Council for North America for full-time schools, inshallah. So I will ask him or request him to squeeze himself as much as he can. Jazakallah khair.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Oh my Lord, please expand my heart and ease my mission and untie any speech complexes so that they may understand my speech. With this very hard task, I don't know what to say right now. You have been listening for about 1 hour to some very, very fruitful presentations. So my responsibility becomes very hard, whether to distort what you have heard or to expand. I will do my best, inshallah, to elaborate on several points. And before we forget, the Muslim Community School, which Brother Abdullah is the principal of since it started, is a highly commended school throughout the Muslim educator's mind. So please, I would encourage all of you to not forget to give nusra and to help and inshallah to donate for the benefit of Muslim children in Canada and everywhere in North America. in Islam, when we talk about Muslim children, we never look at Muslim children in a narrow, simple parameter. We look at Muslim children everywhere they may be. We look at them in the full-time, in the part-time, in the weekend Islamic schools, and as well also as in the public schools. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has enabled us to start working within the area of the public schools and the Muslim student concerns in that area. I was honored to have worked with Dr. Charles Haynes, and his book is very well known to most of us. The book is called History of Religion in America, What to Teach and How. This book has been published in 1990 by the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development Association, and I think about 400,000 copies have been published, and the book is available throughout the United States. The book has devoted one whole chapter, which is a chapter number 9, about the Muslim student requirements and needs in public schools. So I would encourage all the parents to grab a copy. It's a little bit expensive, it's about $17 a copy, but what most important is what is included in that chapter. If you just take that book and you show it to your school, to your immediate school where your children go in the public school, they will be delighted, they will be certainly interested, and they will be more accommodating to your needs and to your children's needs in the public school. Now, I would like to remind you of what Brother Dr. Sayyid Muhammad Saeed has said last night about one significance of ISNA's growth, which is the accommodation also, or the invitation to Dr. Charles Haynes. He mentioned that last night when he was introducing or talking about Sister Yvonne Haddad and her experience about 10 years ago when she was not enabled, or when she was facing some difficulty and some suspicion was around her. So Dr. Charles Haynes today asked me, Shaban, do you think am I the only non-Muslim in this great convention? I said, no, you are not the only one, and inshallah you will never be the only one. So this is a significance of our growth in ISNA, and this is an indication that ISNA is becoming a very important organization to include Muslims, Sister Sharifah, in the best future, inshallah, for this great nature. Islam, my brothers and sisters, has never existed outside the human growth and the human civilization. Dr. Haynes has mentioned some very, very good points, which I would like to remind you all of. He said that the American nation, the United States of America, is not a Jewish or Christian or Muslim-based nation. It is a nation where everybody is welcome. He also said that the ground rules for this nation have never been religious, and they will not probably be religious, but they are civic. So we have to make that in our mind and keep it all the time. And he also educated us very briefly, and I'm sorry for the time permitted, but at least this session, inshallah, will enable us to get some more and more chances in coming conventions and conferences. He talked about the 16 words in the Bill of Rights, and he emphasized upon the necessity and the need for us as Muslims to speak up and to come straightforward and to make our points clear. People will not come to you to give you rights. You have to go straight forward. You have to fight for your rights. You have to struggle and gain your rights by your own will and your own determination. The constitutional rights, as he said, are protected and guaranteed for every citizen in the United States. And he also invites everybody, wherever you are, wherever you may be, your children are in full-time Islamic school, or in weekend school, or in a public school, go ahead and talk and present your rights and know what exactly you need, and you need the help in. He also addressed the point which is very well known, and also Sharifah has talked about it, the false and the unfair information that exists in so many curricular books in the social studies, more precisely, and more precisely also about Islam and the Islamic culture. He said a very important thing also, which I don't like to forget or to omit, that the Muslim student requirements and needs cannot be all easily accommodated. And I know both me and him, we talked about this, and we addressed like in June, we were together addressing a group of social studies teachers in the state of Utah, and it was very, very well made that we don't expect that all the public school or public education will accommodate all our needs as Muslims, but there are so many things that are feasible, that can be easily accommodated, and there are other things that may need some harder work, where you would have to go into the regulations of the state and the federal laws and so on and so forth. Our next speaker was Sister Suzanne Douglas, whom I have had the chance to meet for the first time today. We have been in contact for a long time now, for about 2 years on the phone. Suzanne is working very hard on preparing, inshallah ta'ala, some books for our Muslim children, and more mainly for the full-time and part-time Islamic schools. The books are being reviewed and revised, and we look forward that her books, inshallah, will be a great asset to our Muslim to our Muslim children, Muslim educators, and Islamic education, inshallah ta'ala. She addressed the administrative and the person-to-person procedures or attitudes that can be achieved in dealing with our problems and the requirements and needs of our Muslim students in the public school. And she said that some of the things can be allowed, they can be easily accommodated, but more basically it depends on our attitude, on our behavior, on our approach, on the way we talk to the administrators in the school. In many instances, she said that some of these relatively small issues can be resolved on a person-to-person between the student and the teacher, or between the parent and the teacher directly, even without going to the long procedure of the administration in the school. She mentioned that the two important components here are the students and the parents, which I definitely have no argument with. And she said that the parents have to speak clearly, and they have to make their points very well known. Also, the students, she said, they have to be sincere in requesting the accommodation, and they have to be good ambassadors for their faith, for the great faith of Islam. She mentioned some very least accommodating requests. As an example, something she said like, how can you enforce a behavior, or you enforce the teacher to enforce, or you request the teacher to enforce a behavior on your child, a behavior which you fail to succeed, or you fail to approach, or you fail to achieve with your own child at your own home. And definitely, Islamically, we all know that the first and the basic Islamic school is home. But we cannot always get what we want. And instead of putting the blame on the teachers or the vice versa, the parents do take the first responsibility in teaching their own kids. She mentioned the fact also that many teachers in public schools, if not, well, a great majority of them, are not exposed to Muslims. And I think Sister Sharifah also elaborated, and she also emphasized upon that. But still, we don't have, as parents or Muslim educators, to just sit still and say, well, they don't know anything, by the time they will change. No, we have to do our roles, and our responsibilities as accurately as possibly as we can do them. The second accommodation that Sister Suzanne Douglas has talked about was the curricula area. And I think the three speakers have mentioned the fact that the social studies textbooks in North America in general are full of misrepresentation and wrong information about Islam, Islamic culture, and Muslims in the world. But she also emphasized the point that debating and increasing knowledge in our Muslim children is very, very important. At the end, she took the chance, alhamdulillah, and she propagated for her field, for social studies, and she encouraged all of us. And Islamically, we should not have any argument, because at-tarikh is a madrasa by itself. At-tarikh, history, is our best reference to learn from. And if we don't have a tarikh, if we don't teach our children history, then we cannot teach them their future. We cannot prepare them for their future. At the end, she mentioned some very, very important solutions, which I hope, inshallah, most of us will learn from and benefit from. Sister Sharifah Al-Khateeb has addressed some very important points in her presentation, and the questions she has raised are very, very important, especially in our existence in North America. Are we willing to be part of this society, or are we willing to exclude ourselves? Do we belong to the whole mainstream with our own identity, with keeping and maintaining our own identity, or we would like to exclude ourselves? Sharifah has mentioned a very important point about ethnicity. Although personally I have some resentment to this word, I don't like to easily take it or buy it as a Muslim. But yes, many of us, unfortunately, do bury this sickness with them and with us in our hearts when we come over. And that reflects, I have seen it personally with Muslim children, so many of them, poor kids, wallahi. They don't know where they belong to. You tell them about Pakistan, you teach them about Egypt, you teach them about whatever, but they have never been there. Our Muslim children are grown up here. They have the right, the immediate right on their parents is to tell them, are they, like she said, Muslim Americans or American Muslims? That question needs a conference by itself, Sharifah. It needs more and more of deliberation. However, please, let's understand that our ethnicity and our confusion can easily be transferable to the generations to come, not only to one generation, but maybe to more and more. We are not in a stage to waste any more time. Our Muslim children have to stand on a very, very solid land and a very solid ground so that they know and so that they become more proud, like we have seen our Toronto School graduates. They have to be very proud that they are Muslims and they will be Muslim scientists, Muslim scholars, and they shall have, inshallah, the chance to elaborate and to contribute more to the civilization of the world. Sharifah Al-Khateeb also has encouraged all the parents to be more and more involved and in the running in what's going on in the schools. And I like what she suggested, or the classification she has made about the different kinds of Muslim parents that she has encountered. And she has made 4 beautiful classifications: the fearful parents, the combative parents, the part-time parents, and the involved parents. And all of them, inshallah ta'ala, there will be some good things in them. But the 3 first ones, we need them to be more and more involved. We are not bothered about those who are already involved. We are not involved, but on the contrary, we appreciate what the involved and concerned Muslim parents have done to their kids and what have contributed to Islam by educating their immediate school board or school board members or school teachers. That's very good. But the 3 other categories or classification, they need to awaken up and they need to be more and more aware of their responsibilities. Before I close up my comments here, I know we are running out of time and Brother Abdullah is looking at me. She talked about multiculturalism, and I also mentioned something about that. She said that we have to understand everybody's religion. In other words, to live in America, you have to be, and in order to be accommodated, you have to accommodate other peoples also. And she also said that we have to respect our youth, especially when they are mature. We have to understand their needs and their choices. And we have to get involved in more and more in the running of the schools, because secluding ourselves does not benefit us nor benefits our religion. At the final, I have a final remarks here. With all what's going on, alhamdulillah, this is a great opportunity for all of us to address this issue, which is very valuable, very vital, very important to all of us. But still, in our maybe lack of knowledge, we should not ignore the fact that there are so many Muslim communities who are not waiting for us to do their job. They are doing their roles, they are doing their responsibilities, and I would here commend what has been done by the Trenton Muslim community in Trenton, New Jersey. And that little piece of news has thrilled and joyed everybody through our newsletter, which was published in June 1990 last year, concerning the approval of the Board of Education in Trenton, New Jersey, to accommodate Eid al-Fitr as an annual celebration where the schools of that area will be closed every day, once a year in Eid al-Fitr, to accommodate Eid al-Fitr as well as Christmas and the Christian, what do you call it, Hanukkah? And the Hanukkah holiday, Christmas. Yeah. So, alhamdulillah, with our knowledge and without our knowledge, Muslim parents concerned and involved are working, and we need more and more work, whether individually or on community base or on a group base. May Allah bless you all, and I seek forgiveness for myself and for all of us. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khairan. I would like to thank all of you for patiently, or those of you who waited behind patiently, because we went a little bit over time, and I would like to extend our thanks on behalf of ISNA for Dr. Haynes, Sister Suzanne, and Sister Sharifah, and Brother Sha'ban Ismail for their contributions. There are a couple of pamphlets here, one on religion in public schools curriculum, questions and answers, The other one is living with our deepest differences, religious liberty in pluralistic society. If you are interested, you can pick up one of them. Jazakumullahu khairan. And Dr. Shaban is saying that ISNA has co-sponsored this one on questions and answers on religion in public schools. Jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all. I just want to request 1 minute because there is a couple of announcements to be made. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum. There are just a few quick announcements. The first announcement is about the session on media that is taking place tomorrow. That those people who are involved in it, please at 8:30 after Maghrib prayer, please we would like to meet them in this corner. Brother Harun Siddiqui and Brother Ibrahim Hooper and Brother Azhar Ali Khan. If they are here, we request them to please after Maghrib prayer come on this side. And similarly, I realize that so many brothers and sisters are coming together here for the first time. They have never seen each other before, and they are taking part in different sessions. If they have any announcement they want to meet their participants, please let us know so that we can announce it and make your meeting with your counterparts easy. The second announcement is about the IMA, Islamic Medical Association. Its executive committee invites all physicians, dentists, and all those workers concerned with healthcare to come to their meeting tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. in room 308 and 309. Every medical student, resident, and everybody whoever is concerned with healthcare is invited. Similarly, there is an announcement from Parents Who Care, PWC, which is a sport group for the Muslim youth of North America, that is MENA. It is meeting at 2:45 tomorrow in the Stoffer Hotel, the Glen Room top level R, which is in fact where the restaurant is. The meeting is open to all parents who are concerned. And lastly, I would again draw your attention to what I said earlier. Please, we have an understanding with the convention center authorities that we will buy a certain number of dinner tickets from them. So those who have not bought their meal tickets, please do so now. Thank you very much.
Formally, as we said, we conclude this session, but I discovered that this is a time for Asr prayer. And most of us who are traveling, and I assume a great number of us is, what we do is formally, you can leave if you want, but we request that you leave quietly. We'll be here for about 15 minutes. If you have some questions to ask at this time, because we still have a few minutes for Asr prayer. So if you are leaving, we would like just kindly to request you to leave quietly. If you want to ask questions, can you step to the microphones just to benefit from Dr. Haynes and the other panelists if you want. Naam akhi, go ahead. If you can kindly direct your question to one of the panelists directly.
Okay. First, I want to congratulate you to doing such a good job in such a short time and such a difficult subject. And I'd like to ask a question to Sister Sharifah, is that if she could kindly tell us that how we can go about making changes in the children curriculum and their books. This is the subject which when we see misrepresentation of Islam in our books, how can we go about changing it? Shukriya.
The best way is, first of all, we are now in the process of trying to coordinate these different groups that are working on and looking at the misrepresentations in the books. But I can give you my address, and the first thing that you can do is when you find a misrepresentation, copy the page and send it to us to bring it to our attention. We will be looking at all the books that exist for the whole country, but sometimes something might be missed, or it may be a new book or whatever, so it's always helpful to send us a copy of it and we'll try to address it. That's on our level. On your level, you can make a copy of it and you can go to the teacher who's using the book themselves and point it out to the teacher and point out what the correct information would be. That's one level. The next level is to show it to the principal, so that the principal is aware that this is misinformation and it's being used in other grades, and the other teachers should be made aware in that school that it is misinformation. Another level you could do is to go to the school board itself. Most school boards allow the public to give a presentation for 3 minutes at a time at any of the school board meetings that go on each month. It's only 3 minutes of time, and all you can do is pick up the phone and register your 3 minutes of time at least half a day ahead of time. Then you go to the school board meeting and they give you the microphone to say what you find objectionable, and the whole school board will listen. When you do that, you need to also write down your comments and make the copy of what you find objectionable, so you can give it, you make enough copies to give to every school board member. That's on the counting level, brings it to their attention even more. The next level you can do is to write a letter to the book companies and inform them that you find this objectionable and why, and ask them to respond to you. So then you would have done all 4 levels of responding to that misinformation.
Jazakallah khair. Before I move to the sisters, Sister Suzanne wants to add a comment to what has been said in this question.
What I wanted to mention was that this work is very important, and Sharifah has outlined a very practical method for pursuing it, and one that certainly is not beyond the scope of all of us. But we should also remember all the time that curricular changes like this will take a long time. They may come through and they may not come through. The book publishing industry is one that's very entrenched and is very, very slow to move, and we can certainly affect them and we will certainly affect them. But the first front is our children, because they are the ones who hear the things, 10 times more things than we ever hear of, that they ever bring home to us, or that we ever even see in books, comments made by teachers, discussion which takes place with other children. So it's so important for us to educate our children first. And not only that, but to teach them how to speak with people of other faiths or of no faith, or to confront the kind of secularisms that come again and again and again in public school discussions and in public school textbooks. They are the first front, and they are the ones who really are the major ambassadors, much more than a parent who goes in, because the other students are learning from them as well.
Sister over there.
Yes. My comment is actually about what Sister Sharifah said. I may not contribute much to what you have said, because you were right on the target, but I did not want this opportunity to pass without commending what you have said, and you really gave us a breath of fresh air. We were under a heavy dose of idealism that we lost touch with what's happening, so thank you for that. And I would like to re-emphasize 2 points that you have mentioned, and your talk was conceptually rich, and I emphasized 2 points here. One has to do with our definition of ourselves. I think that was very perceptive of you to bring this issue of negative definition of ourselves, which we pass to our children. I think there is a larger tendency even in this culture, actually among the Muslims in this culture, to define ourselves in negative terms, and we do not have a clear idea of who we are. And I hope, Sister Sharifah, that you press in the future for conferences and conferences on how do we define ourselves, who we are. Then we pass, because even as parents, there isn't awareness of who we are. And this point has to do, our definition of ourselves has to do with the fact that there is a push toward one interpretation. Who we are has to do with the cultures that we came from, and this is very much de-emphasized and there is a push and pull between religion and culture. We do not have a clear definition of what culture is. What our concept of culture? Culture is seen as negative, as antithetical to religion, and it is de-emphasized in many discourses, many religious discourses, not here in American society, but also in the Middle East and other Islamic society. So the question of who we are has to do with what's our concept of religion and how do we define Islam. There is a larger tendency of defining Islam negatively. Not here. We define Islam, and I tend to formulate it in these terms. We define Islam negatively in terms of how far we are from the West rather than of how close we are to the principles of Islam itself. And this is one point I tried to make. And the other thing that you talked about, which your talk is actually centering around turning the question from the question of right to the question of responsibility. What is our responsibility? And I think that's very positive. You can't imagine how relieving to me to hear you talking, and I hope that you press for these kind of issues in the future. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Akhi, we can give the sister another chance because you already had that, so I want the sister to go ahead. Would you kindly be brief, because we are now using some allowance rather than the time we have.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah.
To Sister Sharifah, I wanted to ask her about the conference she attended in 1989. Was there a handbook that resulted from that conference, and how can I as a parent or how can an educator get a copy of that handbook? There was an article in the newspaper here about the handbook, and I want to know how to get it. To Dr. Haynes, I'd like to know if he can address some more concrete examples of how to put the rights into action for the Islamic community as it pertains to the First Amendment rights of freedom of religion as it pertains to the schools. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair. Alaykum assalam. You can go ahead.
The book that I was talking about, sister, is called the Arab World Notebook, and that notebook is available through many different sources. Nejda Group out in California has it. There's another, they're the ones who produced it originally. There's another group called AWAIR, A-W-A-I-R, in California also, who has it. Some of the, well, I think those are probably the best two sources to get it, because it was Nejda Group out in California that had produced the book. So that would be the best one. I don't have the address with me, but I can try to send it to you. But you could get it. It's in Berkeley, California. If you just call information of Berkeley, California, ask for Nejda, N-A-J-D-A, they will give you the address and phone number.
Before you make your comment, Dr. Haynes, there is a question here from Sister Suzanne. It says, if public schools cannot promote any religion, why are these Christmas parties, holidays, Eastern holidays, and so forth? And then I would like you to address the other question, so I want to join them together for you.
Unfortunately, many of the practices in public schools today remain unconstitutional. And it's important for you to speak up. When you speak up, I can guarantee you that you will have many allies and you will be supported. I think it's already been emphasized that how you present your case is as important as what you say, how you do it. We will work with you. I will work with you. My organization will work with you to see that your rights are protected. You need support, not just from Muslim groups, but from educational groups and other groups to join with you when you make your statement and when you formulate how you want to see things changed. So on the question of holidays, for example, no school in the United States should be celebrating Christmas. They can teach about Christmas, and they can have programs that represent various religions and the music and so forth, but they cannot promote Christianity, and they cannot celebrate a holiday in a state school. If that's going on in your community, then you are on very strong constitutional grounds to object to that. Ask us to help you with that, and we will support you and work with you to see that your rights are protected. The public schools are places where the conscience of every student and every parent must be protected by what goes on. The school boards in your community, in your school district, the school board is the final authority for what goes on in that school and in that classroom. You must be involved with that school board, as you've already heard. You must go to those meetings and make yourself known, serve on those committees. Again, if you write to me or any of us, we can help you and get you support in your community for making these complaints and seeing that these things are changed. They are changing. We've worked together on a statement about religious holidays. It's like this, which gives guidelines supported by religious and educational organizations from around the country. These guidelines will help you if you have a copy, and we'll send you a copy. They will help you as you go to your school board or to your principal and you say, you need to rethink what you're doing in the school.
This would be the last question. I would like you please to be very brief, because we just wanted to close. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. This is directed to Charles Haynes. And the question is, the Friday prayers are very important to us. Is it possible to take our children out for Friday timings?
That's an important question. The Supreme Court in the 1950s ruled that it is constitutional for schools to have released time programs. A school district, therefore, can release students to participate in religious activities during the school week. That is constitutional. A school district is not required to do that. A school district may do that. If a school district, for example, releases Mormon students to go to the nearby Mormon seminary on Wednesday afternoon during the school day, a school district also has to set up a program to release Muslim students on Friday to go to community prayer. If your school district has no release time program, however, and you don't say anything, then nothing will change. You must ask that school district to put in place a release time program. There are some things that you have to do. You have to have it at a limited time. You have to take responsibility for it. But it is legal and it is constitutional, and I think it can be accommodated in school districts around the country. And we'll be glad to help you see that that's done.
Thank you very much. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.